want to welcome you tonight to our midweek Bible study at Bethesda Baptist Church. And this is August the 18th. And we're glad that you're here on this evening. And we're on our journey through the Sermon on the Mount. And it brings us to a passage of Scripture tonight that, I might not have necessarily choose to address on a Sunday morning or something like that. But if you're preaching through a passage of Scripture, you deal with the tough passages just as much as you deal with the easy ones. And so tonight, we deal with a very difficult passage. Jesus was a great communicator, without a doubt. Without a doubt, he was the best. He knew precisely what to say and when to say it and how to say it. And we find in this message tonight that he addresses an issue that we all face sometime or another in our life. We deal with lust. And so tonight, our title of our message is Resisting the Lure of Lust. And the passage of Scripture that we're going to be looking at is found in Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 27, and we'll be reading through verse 30. And so let's find out what Jesus had to say about lust. He says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell." Wow. What a statement that we find here. Jesus begins by quoting the sixth commandments, which everyone in our audience knows, and the Jewish audience which Jesus addressed or was speaking to definitely knew that he was addressing one of the 10 commandments. And the commandment is, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." No adultery. Now, Jesus looks at this passage and he looks at that command, and then he takes it a step further. He goes to the heart of the problem, or the beginning, maybe, those beginning seeds of where the problem of adultery actually began, and starts dealing with it right there. We all know that how important it is when we're dealing with cancer that you catch the cancer early. And the earlier you catch it, the less destructive it will be in your life. And I think this is where Jesus speaks to us today about lust. He knows that lust is the very beginning. It is the seeds of the cancer of adultery that come into our life and can destroy our lives. And so let's begin by thinking about just the deed itself. And what he says in verse 27, he says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.'" Adultery. Now, what is that? In our day and time, we understand what adultery is. It is having sex outside the realm of what we would say marriage, and outside of that protected place and where God honors sex. But here he shares with us outside of that, outside of the marriage bed, sex is prohibited. You shall not commit adultery. And we also know that there is other words that we find, fornication, that is also used in reference to those who have never been married or not married at the time, and 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 still have sex outside the relationship of marriage. And he says all of this basically, he says, is wrong. All right. And if we look in other passages of Scripture, we can find how God really looks upon adultery and fornication. And so I would like to read to you from Proverbs 6, 23 through 29. And this is out of the NIV. It says, "For these commands are a lamp, and the teaching is a light, and the correction of discipline or the way to life, keeping you from the immoral woman, from the smooth tongue of the wayward wife. Do not lust in your heart after her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes, or the prostitute reduces you to a loaf of bread, and the adulteress preys upon your very life. Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? So he who sleeps with another man's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished, but a man who commits adultery lacks judgment. Whoever does so destroys himself. Blows and disgrace are his lot, and his shame will never be wiped away." These are words that I think, we find them in Proverbs 6:23 and through 29 to remind you where we find these again. But these words need to be repeated again and again in our day. And in this passage in Proverbs, we find the proverb writer sharing with us that destructive force of adultery and what it can do to a person's life. And the first thing he says to us in there, he says, "Can a man scoop up fire and place it into his lap without his clothes being burned?" Well, we know that that's impossible. You can't do that. You put a scoop, a scoop of fire in your lap, and it's going to bring pain and destruction in your life immediately. And we need to understand that adultery has consequences, and we know those. It's not rocket science. We see those things in our world, and we know what those consequences are. It is the loss of character, the loss of self-respect, an injury to your career, a smear on your name, a loss of others' respect, embarrassment to your church or our church, the loss of family, and the draining of finances, probably, a loss of your personal spiritual testimony and your walk with Christ, the possibility of diseases in your life, a loss of joy and peace, and the beginning of secrecy and lies. Wow. So it does immediately bring those kinds of things into our life. And then that proverb writer goes on, and he says, "Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched?" And we go, no, because, you don't have to get that's not even, you don't have to be very brilliant to figure that one out. And basically he's saying, you cannot walk into this life of adultery and think you're not going to get burned. You're going to be burned, and there's going to be consequences, and they're going to be severe consequences in your life. And then the last thing he basically says is in verse 33 of the proverb. He says, "Blows and disgrace are his lot, and his shame will never be wiped away." And basically he's saying that kind of the deed of adultery, just sort of never goes away. You never lose that scar on your life. You always have it. And I've had friends who have fallen into this trap, and it is so true. that this scar of adultery, even though some of them have been able to put their lives back together, their families back together, all of those things back together, there is this scar upon their life that is very, very real, and it stays with them forever. And so here, that's the deed, and we find immediately that as Jesus was sharing with us, those things bring destruction. But Jesus then takes this beyond just this deed of adultery. And he says in verse 28, he says, "But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Jesus takes this to that next step of looks, as we would say, that step of lust. Now, this is really difficult to define exactly what lust is, but I think that you know it when it's there. You know the difference between when you see someone and you maybe um, appreciate a person's beauty, or in my case, if I see a lovely lady or a beautiful lady and I can appreciate her beauty, that's one thing. But I also know that within my heart, if I carry that too far, it's not very far from there to the place where lust can become a part of that. And that's where we have to be very careful. In the crudest sense, it would be basically say getting to the place where you undress someone with your eyes, and that can happen. A man or a woman can do that in their own life, but Jesus takes it to that place of lust. And we live in a society today that advertises, promotes all kinds of promotions and things based upon sex, and based upon knowing that you can be tempted so easily with your eyes and brought in to this point of lust. And we are bombarded every day with this. And so it is something I believe that all of us have to deal with, whether it be the shows that we watch, or how intent we are caught off guard by advertisements that we see, or today with the internet and with all the things that are available there, with just a point of a mouse key. And it is so destructive, and can be, and it's so easily obtained for all of us. And what we should realize is immediately when these things begin to approach, and we begin to have those kind of thoughts in our mind, we ought to have red flags immediately begin to fly up in our face. Here's a red flag. This is the seeds of adultery, and we need to avoid those like we would cancer in our life. And so what we find is Jesus gives us some great advice here in sharing with us how to deal with this. He says to us in this, he says, uh, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away, for it is better to lose one of your members than your whole body and be thrown into hell. Or if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. Wow. Harsh, graphic, and radical, all of the same thing, talking about this. But Jesus uses all of this these metaphors, this exaggerated approach to dealing with this, to grab our attention. This is how dangerous this can be, and how destructive it can be in your life. And so when you find and you feel those seeds of maybe lust coming into your life, you need to stop looking, stop doing whatever you're doing. Remove yourself from that situation in your life. And that is what he is saying here. Don't wait. Don't play with this. It is too destructive in your life. And so he uses this radical, um, graphic illustrations here to say, remove these things from your life because it can be that destructive. So, in our day, in our world, I think this is such great advice for us and something that we have to deal with on a week to week basis, month to month basis. We deal with lust in our life. Don't let it plant its seeds in your life, and it will help you avoid the destruction of your witness, of your marriage, your character, of your testimony. It can ruin your influence on your children. It can embarrass you. All of those things. It's not worth it. Let's heed and take this seriously. So these are Jesus' words. You know, he shared these words over 2,000 years ago. And it's amazing how relevant they are for us today. And so I hope and pray that tonight's lesson can benefit you and that you will heed what he has to say. This coming Sunday, I'm going to begin preaching from 1 Thessalonians. And I'm looking forward to that. I hope that you'll be present and you'll come and be a part of that. We still have a number of people who are out because of COVID or COVID prevention in their life, and that's okay. And we'll hope that you'll catch it online. But if you feel comfortable coming and maybe wearing a mask or distancing yourself from others so that you can at least worship and see others and that kind of thing, we want to encourage you to come, be a part of it, and we just enjoy our time at Bethesda, and so we look forward to worshiping with you this Sunday, and hope that we'll see you then. Thank you for your time tonight.